Yeah.
I heard that Portland has packages that are over 500.
Well, when you print the whole word, when you print the whole ordinance section that's referring to, which you almost have to do if you're gonna sit there and work off your laptop. So that's what makes it so long.
Lou, are you?
Read it all, do any problems or no?
Hmm?
And then they take notes.
I don't care.
elaborate why you should choose me.
All right, good evening and welcome to the Thursday, August 16th, 2023 Scarborough Board of Education Workshop. Can we call the attendance, please, Diane?
Sure.
Mrs. Gammon,
Here.
Mr. Kelleher,
Here.
Miss Leong,
Here.
Mrs. Lindstrom,
Here.
Mr. Mayorino, Ms. Turpinian,
Here.
Mr. Peony Huff,
Here.
Mr. Shumway,
He's gonna.
and Miss Leisure.
Here.
Perfect, thank you. Would everybody please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Agenda item 4.0 is a workshop and 4.1 is the Unified School Project Next Steps. So we're just here to debrief what happened last week, next steps and things that we can do as two bodies. But as we're getting started, just because we do have a new counselor, maybe we could just go around the table and introduce ourselves so that everybody can meet. I'm Shannon Lindstrom. I'm the school board chair.
Jeff Bruno, superintendent.
I'm Freela Turpinian. Jillian Turpin, Huff.
Last assistant, John Joseph Patrick Keller the third.
Paul, town manager.
Cushing, town council.
John Anderson, Town Council.
Don Hamel, town council.
April Siler, Town Council. Karen Shute, Town Council.
Nick McGee, council chair.
Brian Marino, School Board.
Marie Katarina, Town Council.
Hi, Jean Marie.
Jenna Leong, School Board.
Carolyn Gammon, School Board.
Perfect. Not to like call it, we have some seats up front if you're interested. You're welcome to move the agendas and sit right there. Either one is fine. Just for the public to know, we do things a little bit different in our workshop. So there's not an opportunity for public comment in the workshop, but we will have our regularly scheduled meeting right after this. And there's an opportunity at the top of the meeting to make public comment then. So you're welcome to just stay after this and make it at the top of the next. And I will just put in a plug. We are also doing fall sports recognition. If you're interested in staying and hearing about from the fall sports teams, it's actually a really awesome meeting. If you've never attended, I know April would have experienced them, and it's super great to get to hear from the kids what they've experienced, what's gone on this year. So if you're able to stay, that's a really great experience as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and open this up and talk about what happened on Tuesday. I guess first maybe are there any thoughts anybody wants to share about the referendum? And as we know, the school, the no votes were about 5,900, the yes votes less than 3,000. Is that right? Can you remind me of the 31, 33? Yeah, less than 3,300. Are there any thoughts right off the bat before we hop into next steps about that, or anybody want to share anything?
My personal opinion, just what I've taken away and reflecting and thinking back on the meetings we had with the town. I think it was telling, when we, in retrospect, we heard all the reasons. And so I think it was just maybe if we had one or two of those working against us instead of all 3 or 4 of those things working against us, we may have had a different outcome, but there's, I think, just too many things that were lined up against the what we had put forth. And so time to start over and figure out a path forward. So yeah, what I was very encouraged by, I think it was the town council meeting that was right after the election. I think Shannon, you spoke, and I was just very encouraged by the public who said they want to help. And we've been getting emails about that. And it's just going to make a better, stronger proposal for next time.
Thank you, Carolyn.
That's a lot how I feel. I mean, I love the fact the room is full.
Yeah.
I wish it was a lot sooner. Because now we have to go back and do a lot of additional work, which, you know, we come here to do that, but I hope that the people who are here tonight and have spoken at town council continue to come, because I know we've said that for, I mean, I've been on the board for a year. We've been saying it for at least a year. And there hasn't been great attendance. So we've offered many public forums. And, you know, I look forward to the fact that there's a lot of people here who look like they want to step up and at least get involved, because that's what we need. We need involvement, not just critics, right? We need that support to know how we get everybody on the same page, because this is truly a community issue. It's not just a school board, town council issue. And I think we said it plenty of times that I love the fact that we've been doing this with town council. I think this is a huge step for the town and for the community. And I think it has worked really well for us. So even though it was last minute, I appreciate you guys coming here to be a part of this with us.
Thank you, Brian. Any other? Yeah, that's, I think if we probably, to your point, Carolyn, and Brian's point, if we think back about the meetings between town council and the school board and the business, the building steering committee, I think we do probably know why this failed. We can at least make assumptions as to why, like to your point last night, Nick, like we can't say specifically this is it. But I think we have a good idea. What I was really reflecting on since last night is actually something you said, Dawn. What if we look, I guess I should say from the beginning, I'm a proponent of a survey. And I'm a proponent of a survey because I want to understand how we get to a, how do we make a process and how do we get to a solution that we have the most support with our community. But what I heard you say last night, Dawn, that I actually was like, oh, that makes sense, is what if we flip the questions around and made that more, what would you support going forward versus why did you say no in the past? Because I think if we ask, why did we say no, we're going to hear the top 3 reasons that we all likely assume we know, right? Which is cost, the downs, the location, and my desire to keep the 3 small schools. But if we change that and we reflect more on what are you willing to support going forward, that's a different way of getting at that same bit of information.
Yeah, I participated in a lot of group sessions and things like this where there's a lot of ambiguity and a lot of conflict. And the best way to move forward is to really try to understand what people want it to be and you know, just come into it and trying to eradicate preconceptions and keep an open mind and move forward. And I don't know, I mean, I participated in these that are self-governed and others that are facilitated, but I think if we pivot, if we move in that direction, I think it's going to be a better experience for everybody and a better outcome. I mean, we'll still along the way have to talk about what didn't work, but we should be spending 80% of our time on exploring what's possible.
Shannon, I'm sorry. I want you to know that I have received about 3 or 4 phone calls today from people who wanted to talk to me regarding why they voted no. And I have not had a chance. I've been tied up with, I work, you know, so I've been tied up with it all day, but I will get back to them tomorrow regarding, you know, because what I would like them to do is, one of them went off on the long list. What I'm gonna gently see if I can get some feedback on, well, what's your number 1, 2, and 3? Just for the heck of it on that. And then apparently, I haven't gotten the leader yet, but apparently there's an article in the leader, and I have a quotation on I guess it's the front page, according to this gentleman who wrote to me. And he really wants to work with the committee. I happen to know him. He would be really good to have on the committee. So, because I put out a call for action saying, hey, instead of saying no, get involved, basically. So I will forward that to you guys. Is that how you want to do that? If I get people saying they want to be involved?
Yeah, we've been, so to Carolyn's point, we have gotten, a handful of emails so far of people who are interested in, serving. And what we're doing is we're keeping a list going because it's been, I guess I should back up 1 second and say it's been this awkward period for us because the town council you had a meeting change and that happened to be right after the election and the school board hasn't yet met. This is our first opportunity to even talk about this and together as a body and what happened and what we need to focus on moving forward. But you've had 2 opportunities to now meet, right? And so there's this awkward timing issue at play too. But and in addition to that, the building steering committee hasn't yet met either. So what I'm doing is I'm keeping a list, or what we're doing, I should say, is keeping a list of everybody who's interested in serving. And then once the building steering committee meets, I think that's one of their first topics is to focus on, do we expand the committee? Do we add more community members? How do we make this more inclusive? And then then it's, what does that process look like, right? And then we reach back out to everybody who's interested.
Okay, I'll forward you anything I get.
Perfect. Thank you. All right, I know you were speaking and John, you were speaking too.
Oh, I think I was just going to also agree with Councilor Hamel that, you know, we definitely want to hear what our opportunities are and what the community wants and what the community values. And hopefully we can really drill that down. And I think that a survey is definitely the first step of that anyway. So yeah, I appreciate those thoughts and any guidance council willing to find toward that process.
Yeah, one thing I was just going to say procedurally in response to what Jillian just said, and that is that, and you know, we're witnessing this from the beginning of the meeting. Your governance structure and what you're able to do is different than what the town council deals with. And you know, we've been able to do some things that you're not allowed to do, or your procedure doesn't include those things. So I think that's something we're going to have to really work on. You know, getting input from the public, for example, in workshops, or taking time to give the public extra time to speak. You know, those are things that we've done tactically as a council, and they're permitted, but our whole framework is different.
Yeah.
So we're just going to have to be respectful of that and do the best we can with making that flexible if that's possible.
Yeah. I do think there's, and something that Brian said earlier, I think one of the biggest positive takeaways for me is how much these 2 bodies have worked together collaboratively on this. And it is, in my time, this is not that there was problems before, but this is really the most collaborative I've seen these 2 bodies, and I'm really appreciative of that. So I know I said it in email, but I also want to publicly thank you for the support that you've given us and shown us in this process. And it's hard. It's been a hard road. It's been a long road, and it feels like it's been 15 years and it's been a year, right? Like it seems like a long time, and it's made easier when we're working well together. So I really appreciate that too.
So
Hold on, let me go to John first.
still in like reflection mode,
Yeah.
you know, I was honestly shocked by the outcome of the vote. I think the committee worked incredibly hard, did a lot of work, did a lot of due diligence. But I do think part of the challenge, not only the issues with the package, but perhaps the fact that it was a strategic solution solving many problems, made it really hard to communicate. Even up to the last minute, I think I shared with Shannon, when I met with one person and we talked about the solution, they thought the K-8 strategic solution meant that the school was for K-8.
Yeah.
And so they would, when they thought of that, they're like, that's a huge school with kindergartners. And I had to be like, oh no, that's not what it is, but that's what they saw and that's what they thought. So, you know, I just think as we go forward, really being clear on the problems we're solving and the sequencing, and maybe having to prioritize them, because I think, as we all know, there are many problems that need to get addressed, but you know, is a piecemeal solution that takes time probably the better solution, even though likely that's going to cost more in the long run for everybody, but near term will be more affordable. So I think that's what I heard mostly from folks, either on election day or at the polls, was the concern about affordability. And this project itself became the focus of that. And affordability, I think, isn't necessarily completely within our control, but it's clearly a factor that a lot of people are concerned about with inflation, the cost of living. A lot of people talk to me about rising rent costs and concerns about that and being able to afford to live in Scarborough. So I think that's a real macro challenge that we have to come to terms with as we kind of find that next solution, is that a lot of people are really concerned about being able to afford to stay in their homes and live here. And so even though I think what we did considered that significantly, and that solution really long-term was the likely most affordable solution, unfortunately, the long-term benefit of that, I think, wasn't landing. And it really is about trying to think a little bit more short-term, probably, that we're going to have to do as we go forward. I do want to say, though, all of the great work is not lost.
No.
That I think we're going to be able to leverage that in its entirety. The enrollment study, gosh, I'm never going to remember that document.
Space allocation
The
workbook.
space allocation workbook that really all the staff spent a lot of time figuring out needs. So I think we have so much of a foundation to build from. I think we can get something, as Carolyn said, probably better with more input from the community that will ultimately hopefully solve all those problems, but maybe not as quickly as we want to and honestly should. We're just going to have to be a little bit more choiceful and priorities as a community, I think. But, I just want to thank the committee as well for all the work that they did. These were residents, experts, school staff. Like it was a phenomenal effort by everybody. Unfortunately, it just wasn't the right solution for our community. And so I'm ready to get back to work and continue the partnership to see if we can find something that is right for the community, that ultimately makes sure our kids have the facilities and the teachers have the tools they need to give our children the best education.
I'm gonna go to him, then back to you.
Shannon, it feels to me like you'll need to get more specific about community involvement. That will have to be more outreach as opposed to, hey, come on down, we have a meeting. In a political campaign, you'd have people having house parties. You'd be doing it on multiple occasions so that not only would you be receiving input, but you'd also be establishing some small groups that could give you feedback about your progress as you went along so that you get some course corrections. And so I think as an example, I'm new to this. I've said this, I think, at the last meeting, but there are a couple thousand people who are living at the Downs, and by my limited conversations, they seem to be happy out there. They choose that type of accommodation because it suits their lifestyle, and yet they are obviously underrepresented in any dialogues about things that affect that community. And so if the neighborhood, that's one of the features that we've heard over and over again, that the neighborhood is really important. When I started out here in the 1800s, I lived on Church Street. We had a little neighborhood there. And, if you called me up and said, could you get 6 or 7 of your neighbors to come and sit in the living room so that we can understand what's going on, I think I probably could have gotten that together. And so I believe surveys will be important. That's going to give you quantitative data, but an ongoing conversation that is in Pine Point, it's in Pleasant Hill, it's in Dunstan, it's at the Downs, and at the same time building some communication channels that go beyond what I see as very limited. I mean, if you actually look at the number of people who attend public meetings, if you look at the number of views of the town meeting, it's a narrow band. And for something this big, and I'll talk about the elephant in the room here, is that a very small group of people spent $9,000 defeating this thing. And they use language that in some respects mischaracterized things. It was, in my humble opinion, distasteful at the very least, but that's not going away. Okay, that's going to be out there. It's out there as recently as today. There are people on Facebook who characterized last night's meeting as the resolution was some devious ploy to keep the Downs in play, and now we'll sue it. Okay, so I think that, and I'm not trying to be negative here, but I think to ignore that and to ignore the fact that that is a force in our community creates the potential to risk a lot of good work without having a counterbalancing force to that, which is neighborhood people who have credibility, who may not have the time to always come to these meetings, but who are willing to get involved at their community level.
Can I respond to that just, and then come to you, is that okay? So this is something I wanted to talk about in a little bit after the survey and after next steps and the finances of this, but I want to say this in response to what you're saying. The outcome of the election was incredibly shocking to me as well. And not because it was defeated, that's not what I'm saying. What shocked me was the number of no votes that were there. I expected it to be within a couple of hundred votes. I expected it to be very close either way. And I mean, up until the day of, I could not tell you which way it was going to go. I did not expect the very wide margin that was there. So in reflecting back, and this is what I said at that first Wednesday meeting afterward, it tells me there's a bigger problem here. And what you're suggesting is going on, that you're reading on Facebook is also suggesting to me that there's a bigger problem at play here. And it's not that, I don't even think it's spending $9,000. I think there's a trust factor that we, the 14 of us, have to figure out. And we have to work through it. Because until we do that, we can continue to identify problems in this town. We can continue to identify solutions, and we can continue to pay for professionals and experts to come in and help us solve those problems, and we can continue to put them on the ballot and they will continue to fail because we're not addressing the underlying problem. And so I do think as we look forward, we almost have, I was telling John, I feel like we're on these two tracks that are going on at the same time. We have a school, that problem is not going away. We have to solve a school problem, but then we have this other surprise to me. That is whatever this underlying, I don't claim to have the answers or know what it is, but this underlying, I guess, trust is what I'll call it, or lack of trust that's happening. And the 14 of us are really charged with solving both, or addressing both, I'll say it that way.
And then I think we will all, I know, we all have to look at also is, yes, we want people involved and being on the committee, not being on the committee, but they need to get involved in one way specifically that we're not, once mentioned. We can't say that most of our community wants this is what they want, because I think the no vote only equals about a third of registered voters in Scarborough. So we've got, what do we have, about half the voters went out and voted. So we get another half of the people that are not voting or not participating. We need to figure a way to get, we need to know what they think. What do these people think? Because we only know what the people that went out and think. We don't know what the other people think, and they are just as much of the community as we are. They pay taxes, so we've got to figure a way to get to more people, because this is, I mean, it's a huge expense that everyone's, whatever the solution is, everyone's going to be involved in it. We're all paying for it. Everyone's doing something. So we need to get to as many people as we can, because you can't say that, it was overwhelming, because we don't know what half the people in the town think, minus the kid.
So I'd like to respond to what John has said. Yeah, it's gonna be very hard to find out what everybody thinks, okay? But this election, the voter turnout was 50% of active voters, and that was almost twice what a typical turnout would be for an election of this kind. So you've heard from more people than you typically hear in an election. So we got to go with that. I think we got to go with that, but not try to draw too many conclusions. In terms of the communication vehicles and Facebook and those kinds of things, people will will use the things they think that are accessible to them.
Mhm.
And, it's an alpha and omega issue about social media. I mean, it's great that there's so much of it available. It is horrible that it's hard to control and you don't know how valid it is. But I would say that there's also this issue of the people participate in vehicles where they find they're accessible and where they feel that they're, is the best information. And unfortunately, if you look at our history, our recent histories, we've lost faith in traditional institutions, and this is, this is not limited to schools. I mean, it's everything, So I think that part of it has to do with, in the past, there used to be so many sources of print media that was, than there are today. And the print media sources are really diminished and they've been replaced by these things that turn on a dime. So I think we have control of that, and we have the ability to kind of do better than just taking things at face values. But to try to say that we don't, we're gonna grade them, we're gonna say one source is better than another, I think it's difficult. And I think that people participate in the vehicles that they feel are going to be responsive to them, and frankly, some of our more traditional institutions are not, for a wide variety of reasons. So I just think we're going to have to do our best with that, and try to put markers down as we go. So, but very good question, very fair point.
I'm gonna build up what Don was saying. I think we've got a lot of really great information out of the informational meetings that were held, and we could do, just an idea, more of those during the process. And hopefully people will show up like they did on this go around. But I think was a really effective way for us to get information out there and seek feedback.
Yeah.
So I think more of that is, I think it's one thing that worked.
Yeah.
I just want to reiterate my support for a community-wide survey on what it is we believe could get the support needed to support the schools. I think that's the most important first step you can take here. I'm not big on dwelling on the past. That's just not, it's great. You got to learn from it. And you take your time and you try to learn from it. If I had to point at something that maybe went wrong and it happened early, was there were conclusions and not to say that due diligence hadn't been done, but I think the big miss here was there was a plan put forward without actually direct community response, in the sense of you didn't have that baseline of a community-wide survey that was conducted 6-7 years ago that helped point you in the right direction. What we had was our best judgment from our school board or school leadership saying we believe this is the best solution. So not bringing the public into that conversation early, I think it's part of the battle that we're fighting. I think the survey gives us the opportunity to take that information, share the data openly, and then say, this is where the compass is pointing. This is the information that we now need to translate into a school solution. And I think that's your best spot to take your next step forward. I would say that a reconstitution of the building committee, I would encourage you to approach that with the mindset that we now have a lot of people who are saying they're willing to be involved and willing to be part of a solution. So I would just encourage you to try to take all of those people and find certain segments of the population that they may represent certain aspects of this community, opinions of the community, and get them all sitting around the table. And I think that's going to mean that same building committee, it's not going to be the same building committee you had before. Not to say that not all the members are gone. What I'm saying is you need to somehow include those people that are stepping forward to make a difference. So just, and for what it's worth, I think a lot of the conversation after that point, I think needs to happen after we have survey results. Because I don't know what land we should pursue. I don't know if it's a smaller parcel for a fourth building. I don't know if it's no parcels. And the community is going to tell us all they want is renovation of existing schools. I don't know if it's a 25-acre parcel. So to start jumping ahead without any real good data, I feel I'd hate to see us spend all of this money to pursue a solution that doesn't have a baseline of support to begin with, so.
Yeah.
That's just my initial reaction to vote and where we are today.
Yeah, and I'm of the same mindset you are, because I don't want us in the same position next year, right? Again, the problem's not going away, and so I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna walk it back a little bit. The faster we can get to a solution that most people support, the better we are all going to be in this room, in this community, right? But I don't want it to sound like I'm saying we're gonna slap the same thing back up, or we're gonna rush a new thing right back out there. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I am suggesting I still have the same urgency today that I had a month ago, because I know these kids are coming. So I am also in support of a survey. My concern is the financing behind the survey. I'm wondering if you have any information about cost of surveying that you can share?
Yeah, we have some preliminary information. We've just going through our second community-wide survey and had, in my estimation, very good results with that firm. There are other firms that can be considered. That community survey costs $20,000, and that's been consistent both times. We've reached out and suggested that this survey would be probably a bit smaller, fewer questions than the community-wide survey. But there's still a fair amount, it's kind of the same level of effort in many respects still applies. So the rough budget would be 16 to 18,000. And essentially it takes about 7 to 8 weeks from start to finish to prepare the survey, to process it in the community, to get their survey results back and then report them out.
It takes about how long, did you say?
7 to 8 weeks.
You throw in the holidays, probably a little.
Yeah, and you certainly should be mindful of the time of year you're doing it. But this would be a statistically valid survey. It would be mailed to a certain number of households. I think we used 4,000 households for the community survey. It might be a slightly lesser number. And they're looking for a response rate of at least 600, which we have exceeded again. So again, it might be a slightly smaller data set, but to the point raised earlier, you know, a survey of residents, it wouldn't be looking at those that voted. It would be done, you know, kind of randomly and across our community. So presumably you'd be getting some that voted, some that didn't. I suppose if you wanted to really be specific, we know who did vote, but it strikes me that you'd want to get a survey of our residents at large.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's certainly something town staff can assist in. I think crafting the questions is going to be the real biggest part of this. To do it in such a way that it's going to produce the sort of results and data that will be meaningful.
And that's part of the services that are provided by the consultant. Because I will say, having worked firsthand with the community survey, we didn't write we gave them a general idea of the information that we were hoping to get. And then they were able to help us craft the question. So that would not be, if we were going to pay a consultant, that would be part of the services that they would provide.
Well, I guess the elephant in the room is that we don't have $16,000 to $18,000 in our budget, right? We haven't budgeted for this. And so I'm left trying to figure out how do we create a survey for essentially nothing. And I don't know how we do that unless we go to some sort of online survey that we can create in-house. But then I'm struck with, what do you do with people that don't use a computer, don't use the internet? How do they get to participate? And so
It has to be mailed.
We have general fund balance.
Can our school impact fees not a qualified use for something like this? Since it's still around the reconstruction or?
Yeah, we can try and, we can.
See if we can shake the money tree in the backyard.
Can I ask a question?
One thing I mentioned at this point in terms of talking about money and who's gonna pay. We run into this quite often, where line of sight to financials, at least from the municipality to the school, it's difficult. You know, we don't have line item authority, as you know, in terms of approving funds. We can only approve a total amount. So I know every year we kind of go through that and we ask questions that we can't get answers to. So we stop asking them. But I think that you know, I wouldn't think that $20,000 is going to compare like an overwhelming obstacle to what's been spent to this point from both sides of the house, you know, from the school as well as the town in terms of getting us to this point. I wouldn't even want to wager a guess in terms of what's been spent, but it's a much bigger figure than that.
Yeah.
So I would hope that we could find a way to get past that. I mean, the good news is you've got a source here that is trusted, validated. It's a slightly different story in terms of what the surveys say and then what political will there is behind taking action around what those things say. So I want to make sure people are aware it's going to be two different steps. But I think using that source and getting professional help from folks that could help us do something that would be statistically valid would be a very good way to start.
Can I ask a different question about the survey? Tom, I heard you say that that a survey of this kind would be mailed out to a segment of the Scarborough community.
Randomly selected.
So I guess my question would be, what if there are other constituents who want to provide feedback and they aren't mailed that? How is that addressed?
What we've done in the past, and we did it again this time around, is did the statistically valid portion, and then we have made it available online. And so we kept those two data sets separate, and you can actually compare them. The results are remarkably similar.
Close, yeah.
So there's a way to open it up.
And that would open up at the same time that the mailed portion were mailed, or would you?
We
Did
did
we
it
wait?
after.
Yeah.
We did it after, but I think that's something you can talk to the consultant about.
Yeah.
Did you ever contemplate doing any kind of focus group follow-up? I don't know that the community survey per se is necessary for that, but it seems that having some level of qualitative data that digs into the results of this, in this case, would be very meaningful. And
Yeah,
so-
I don't recall focus group per se, but I do recall a consultant does produce a report. They did appear at a council meeting and review the results. And it was available for questions.
So more directly, I guess I would say, I think it would be worthwhile asking the consultant about the value of focus groups in this type of situation and what that might cost. And again, it's beneficial as a follow-on. So it's an option, I guess is what I'm saying. But if you don't, so you can look at it and say, well, these results are so overwhelming and clear that we know exactly what to do. Or you can say, gee, they raise more questions than they answer. Now what? And so as long as you're shaking that tree, it might be reasonable to find out how much harder you'd have to shake it to go deeper.
Yeah, I agree with John in the sense that the near term, we need a survey and we need to kind of get some information, but how do we think about this as a longer term community engagement and feedback strategy to make sure as key decision points get made along the way, as the new solution comes together, that we're constantly pulsing, which could be through focus groups or through another survey, like what's the right, as the new plan comes together, like what is the right touch points with the public to get that constant pulse?
Yeah.
Right? Because as you said, like I want to go to the polls next time, feeling like we've done all the data, we have all the information, we've checked in with the public, we've gotten feedback along the way, and we feel like we have a solution that's gonna pass for the children. So I love the idea of like not just the survey, we need to do that first and we need to prioritize that and get that going and get that done. But how do we build that feedback loop constantly with the public, especially as key decision points happen throughout the process?
If I may just follow on to that, Shannon, to your point earlier about the larger issue of trust, underlying that is a continual theme of you're not listening to us. And so we need to know more about that, and our actions need to be set up to demonstrate that we are actively listening and actively responding to people. And so I think this process, beyond just getting information about the schools, to your point, is a first step
Mhm,
in sort of getting a course correction around this listening.
mhm, I agree.
One other strategy, slightly different, between the survey results, presuming that they are somewhat clear, produce the results that are helpful and potentially actionable. But between that period and kind of coming up with a solution, to the point raised, perhaps you could do some outreach in the community saying, this is what we heard from you, and kind of test that a bit further to see if it resonates and you can validate it. I don't know if it has to be an exhaustive process, but some little more effort between survey and solution would be
Mhm.
appropriate.
Yeah, like I would I mean, I presume that the consultant would come back out and host a walk through the results with us. Is that part of the
Yep.
fee? So that we can invite everyone back again, right? All 14 of us again and or 16 or 18, 17 of us. Or 19 of us and walk through the results, right, together.
But as Donald suggested earlier, maybe there's an extra effort that you
Yeah.
do some outreach in the
Yeah.
neighborhoods and say,
This is resonating.
And I would just add, you know, I think it shouldn't go unsaid that right now we have a level of engagement that we have not enjoyed for the past year. And so I think that we should really try and capitalize on the amount of engagement that we're seeing right now. Because again, to give credit where credit is due, we met every Tuesday night and did a info session open to the public. Shannon and I did those neighborhood outreach,
Mhm.
you know, 6 o'clock in people's kitchens. We did every community place we could think of, community services, Martin's Point, you know, neighborhoods that had a social hour. And so we did those things, you know, and people weren't necessarily engaged or all that riled up. And now what we're hearing is people are here for it. So I think, you know, I think we would have more engagement now. And we really, I think that window gets
Yeah.
smaller and smaller as time goes by.
So what I'm hearing you say is everybody back here and online just signed up for
Yeah.
hosting something at your home,
Yeah.
right?
And I'll be there.
Yeah.
Kitchen.
Or maybe, yeah. Yeah.
Like holistically though, I mean, this problem has occurred over and over again, not just with this. In other projects as well, so it sounds like Don's signing up for a little bit longer of a study on that. No, but more seriously, like, I mean, what we, like, you know, I'm just kidding. You know, like. looking
Don
forward to
Cushing.
this.
The dawn. Yes.
But, you know, we don't wanna keep doing this, you know, moving forward either, so hopefully maybe with this process, we can learn something and do this,
Memorialize
repeat it in future
Yep.
endeavors, so.
I think this brings up a bigger point that we talk about trust and, you know, many of us have lived in other towns, whether it's growing up or over the years, we've moved with family or whatnot. Every town functions differently, but I think there's always a desire in every community to have like this sense of, you know, feeling connected, whether it exists or it doesn't. And this sense of wanting to find your own place in that community. And if not, then you move, right? And some people they actually do move. But I feel like with this trust issue that we're talking about, and the fact that we do have people that are actually showing up tonight, you know, again, I'm appreciative of that. I can speak for myself. Many of you have shared the same sentiment, because I know that there have been many, many meetings where this has been offered and nobody has showed up, or we've only had 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people. I mean, it's been single digits most of the time for those meetings. So I mean, if it took a referendum to fail to get people motivated to come out, I think the big message here is that, you know, it's never too late to get involved in your community.
Yeah.
And that we want you to be involved, right? We have said it time and time again. I've said it on different committees that I've been on. I think the challenge for the community, and I'm kind of speaking to the community, but I'm speaking also to us to figure out a way to do this, is before I got onto the school board, right? I'd live in my little house and I would just, you know, only tune in when I saw an issue that would be of importance to me, right? Is that selfish for me? Kind of, right? But should I tune into the bigger picture because I'm part of the community, right? Should I take a role in the conversations that are happening online, right? Don mentioned Facebook and things like that. Should I be a responsible citizen and call out people who are constantly negative in this town, or actually constantly bringing up this false information, whatever that might be? The way I was always raised is if you're not part of the solution or contributing to it, then you're part of the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that that's something that as two boards we need to think of, but I'm also speaking to the fact that we do have a large audience tonight. I'm glad you're here. We need you to keep coming back out because, you know, we have a big task in front of us, and it has been a big task. And, you know, I know it's easy with all of our schedules to find excuses not to show up to things, but if we are a community and we want to be proud of who Scarborough is and this top tier school district that has been top ranked for a long time in many different ways and well respected in many different ways, that takes a community to do that. And so I'm kind of speaking to everybody, but it's something that for me, community has always been important to me. And it was probably one of the most disheartening things that I saw, this being like the first formal election going through, like the first going through a polling aside from when I was elected. There's so much tension in this community, and I think that's the elephant in the room. And for whatever that reason is, which I know, you know, Shannon said, we don't quite know what that is, but I think it needs to be addressed. And I think people that aren't happy with things need to voice that, but in a productive manner, not just being a keyboard warrior online. You need to show up to these meetings and not yell at us, but come with maybe an idea or a solution, or a way that you can contribute, right, as a community member, because the yelling doesn't get anywhere. The false narratives don't get us anywhere productive. I think it's about being a good citizen and a good neighbor, right? I'll be done with my soapbox now.
So I just want to add, you know, I agree, and I hope that some of these political action committees that, you know, choose to use certain tactics also come to the table as residents with solutions. So
Yes.
I really want to see them here. I was very displeased when Shannon and I were doing some door to door, and a couple times people said, I'd love to get involved. I just don't want to because of the vitriol and the fighting.
I heard that too.
And I just, you know, I would love to see us stop that and really focus on, like, be the adults in the room. We're trying to address needs for our children. We're all smart. We all have good ideas. Bring them to the table and let's talk through them and let's find some solutions. I want people to not be afraid to participate out of fear of that they're going to get attacked or have their image put in the paper, or, you know, see things in the paper that say things like make your elected officials pay. Like, that's just, to me, drawing the line. And I don't think that's our community. And I want to make sure people feel safe being a part of something great like this. And I want to make sure that these groups just stop with that type of language and come to the table, be a part of the conversation.
I think it's about raising the bar as a community, right? If we want to be Scarborough that stands out because people want to be here and because we are an awesome community, we need to raise the bar collectively. And that's everybody, right? We talk about building great schools for our kids. Well, let's set good examples for our kids. And, you know, one of the biggest things my wife and I talk about that we're scared of is all the social media and what we see on there and what that's going to do for our kids when they actually finally have access to it. And how does that affect their lives, right? Well, I'd like to see, honestly, some of our adults not stop acting like children in this community and start, you know, being respectful to each other. Because I think, similar to John's point, it again is disheartening to see that we have elections in this town that go, you know, there's no competition to them. It's like when I ran to take this seat, it would be nice to know that we have multiple people to choose from for different seats, rather than, I mean, it was nice for town council, actually, we had, 4 people running and 3 people who needed seats. But in the past, right, whether it's school board or town council, things have gone, you know, without competition. And I think a lot of that is due to that vitriol and, you know, that feeling that people are like, I don't want to be the subject of, you know, whatever this, I'm going to call them a hate group, because that's kind of what it seems like, is there's not much negative that comes out of some of these local PACs. Honestly, I haven't seen a single thing positive. So I think it's about us to be positive influences in the community.
I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. The people who organize in groups like that are exercising their free rights, their rights of expression. So, and they're doing it in a way, that frankly is effective, okay? You can complain about it,
But is it positive?
well.
Does it
that's-
better the community?
Is it
Well-
positive in terms of your evaluation of it and your feeling that, well, if the answers were different, I would be able to say that would be positive. That is a very individual assessment. So I think, we need to spend less time on that and talking about, let's try to go forward and we're not gonna, I personally can't regulate propriety in terms of others' communications. I try to focus on my own, okay? I'm gonna try to do that. I'm gonna spend more time doing that. And if it's right, you'll hear about it. And if it's wrong, you'll hear more about it. So
Yeah,
you hit on the same. I just want to say one thing about
Sorry.
running for office. One of the things that are difficult is that very few people want to do this. Who would sign up?
Besides.
Yeah.
It's a small group of, who knows why they're like that. We won't spend a lot of time on that, but we need to encourage people to do that, to feel as though they can be part of the public process. And there's gonna be, harsh words, and there can be stuff that we hear that we don't like, and we don't have to react or start calling people out or saying it's not appropriate or applying my own value system to what I'm hearing. I just want to hear more from more people, focus forward.
Yeah.
And that's, we control that.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Don, and I think I'm struggling a little bit with hate. Well, I'm not struggling a little bit. I am struggling, period, with hate group. That feels a little bit harsh. And I think that these groups, all of them have organized because they feel a sense of something, frustration, anger, disappointment, fill in the blank word. They feel something, and so they're forming a group, or they want to organize with like-minded people, and so they form a group. I understand that, and you're right, they are exercising their rights to do so. What I would love is that we, the 14 of us, are working through a way to make sure everyone all the groups, all the people that aren't part of groups, that everybody feels that they can come to the table and they feel comfortable enough to talk and to share and to express themselves. And so that's what I would like to focus on. And I don't claim to have all the answers. I thought maybe we could talk about perhaps we create some opportunities that are joint between our two bodies where we have community dialogues and we invite everybody to the table. What would be really great, I was thinking about the neighborhood groups that have formed and since this process has started, and I was thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be great if they stayed formed, and if they had things they were concerned about, that they had one person that came to the council or came to the school board and shared, hey, this is what our group is thinking. This is what we're concerned about. Can you help us work through this process? How great would that be if, to your earlier point, that instead of going to other places for sources of information, that we become the place that they're coming to first. And that's where we need to get, is to where our community is coming to these two bodies first. And we're not there.
No.
And that is hard to hear, and it's difficult. I did not enjoy canvassing for 2 months and hearing that you don't listen to me. I didn't enjoy it at all. It doesn't feel good, especially when you are, all of us at some point, I think everyone at these two tables at some point or another has said they value transparency, they value trust. We are going to be an open body. We are going to show you everything. Everything that's behind the Wizard of Oz's curtain is available for you. And so to then still hear, you're not listening is hard. It's hard. And so what do we do to move forward? That's what we have to focus on. How do we move that conversation forward so that everyone feels that they can come and talk and participate?
So I think what we've seen with Counselor Corner is when it's really topical and of interest to people, they show up. So if we just started doing forums to say, come and talk with us, I'm worried we wouldn't have people show up. it has to be something topical, and I think that approach to me is successful. I think we probably as a council need to do more of it to try and get feedback, and I think we can think of, are there joint topics between us
Yeah.
that we would want to do, or even just have a board member attend them to represent the board, because sometimes they do ask questions about things that are,
Yeah.
you know, we're not the expert in, that somebody from the school might be able to answer. So I feel like we have a mechanism in Counselor Corner Live that maybe we just need to double down on and give more opportunities. I think when it comes to the school, like Jillian said, I think if we can find what that right best practices that we want to deploy every time we're trying to make a big decision, whether it's for a school or a major ordinance change. Like what was great about the last Counselor Corner was it was on the topic of short-term rentals. And we didn't have an ordinance to talk about. It was more, we know we need to do something, but we don't know what to do. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
And I think from that, the counselors who attended, I think got a lot of good input. So it's really finding the way to kind of shape the decision together on whatever the topic is. And I think that just seems to work. I think we just need to do more of it.
I concur.
I have like a random plug we can put in. One of the things we have to work on with them is the naming facilities policy.
Yes.
Like maybe that's something that's a joint topic, like how do we name when there's a request to name a field or a building or a. That's something we don't have a policy for, but we have to work together, and it's totally off topic to this, but maybe that's something like when we have those types of situations, I think we absolutely could hold joint, but I'm trying to think of how do we get to a topic that's gets us in the room with people right now.
I think we have to look at maybe decisions that are in the pipeline and try and, again, start inviting them to the conversation before the decisions are made or acted on. And again, we do that a lot in our committees because we have a lot of citizen committees. And that's one thing I don't think a lot of residents know or take advantage of, is that most of the work is happening in a citizen-led committee before it makes its way. And so, but participation there in terms of people attending is lacking. So again, I think some of this is just making sure people know, how do you engage so that your voice can be heard in the most effective way? But I think we as elected officials could figure out what role do we want to insert in that decision-making process that may be different to give us that opportunity to sit with people in here. And again, even for the short-term rental piece, I don't know if we would have had, I don't think that went through a citizen committee or it would go to a citizen committee, but
It got opened up in ordinance.
Yeah.
And then we basically said maybe we should do a council.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
we put it backwards.
yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
mean, that's one of the lessons learned.
Yeah.
Was it was a much more positive experience
Yep.
when we didn't show up with a formulated opinion on it all.
Yep.
We
Yeah.
actually went out to the community first and we're like, hey, we have to deal with this. What are we gonna do?
Yeah.
That potential hard conversation became very productive.
yeah,
And that's why I think, April had a very good experience with that Council Corner Live. Now, it remains to be seen if that carries forward, because now that's gonna have to, our feedback is now having to get developed into an ordinance, which will now need to go through the ordinance
Mhm.
pages again. So, but it was, I'd encourage the school board to try to take that approach.
Yeah.
When you have the results from the survey, let's open it up. Let's have the town there and say, do you guys read this? Are you reading the tea leaves the same way I am? And bring them along and see what happens.
For some people, it's nothing more than a forum to vent, okay? I mean, I know that April's made a commitment to meet with any 2 or 3 people who are willing to show up and talk, and I think that's great. If there's only 1 or 2 people, they have a place to go, and no one else is listening to me, so, and guess what, it's taped on top of that, so. So I think that more devices, more vehicles like that are gonna be helpful, and, they each serve a purpose. It's not, it's not all size fits all, one size fits all. But, and we have more flexibility to do that than the school does, but I think there's a way for us to make those be accessible to both the school, and the rest of the town.
I do think there is value in maybe doing either a Counselor Corner Live or something just on the question of trust, just to like see what type of return we get in terms of people wanting to show up and have that conversation. It feels a little vague to me personally, so I don't know if there's a way to kind of scope it more specifically, but if that's something that we can do just to say, hey, or maybe it's just a meet and greet of elected officials and we just want to get to know you and make sure you know who we are. Like, I'm just throwing some ideas out there because again, I think some of this is like just putting ourselves out there. Even, you know, some of the stuff with the school that I thought was great and there was a lot of good stuff was we had tables at places. And as we were there for the school, I was like, oh, the council probably should have a table here. I think it was Sustainable Scarborough Day. Like the council and the board didn't have their own presence, but we were there for the committee.
Yeah.
And we're meeting people where they are. We're having conversations. Like those to me, like putting ourselves out there and more like Don was saying, like meeting them where they are as opposed to come to our chambers and come talk with us. I think where are those opportunities that we're not taking advantage of that we can actually put ourselves out in the public at major events or things where we can have a presence. But again, that's a lot of work and commitment for us. I know we all have jobs and families and other things that this is kind of a part-time thing for most of us. So, you know, that is a big commitment, but I think it's critical if we want to build the trust, they have to know who we are and how to engage with us.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, that was really the strategy behind educating the community on this, right? Meeting them where they're at. So that meant going to soccer games, that meant going to flag football, that meant going to Sustainable Scarborough, that meant sitting at the library on Saturdays, right? Because to the point made earlier, not everybody can attend these meetings. It conflicts with bedtime, it conflicts with dinner, it conflicts with work, it conflicts with something that is overriding the being here, right? So that was, I think largely, quite frankly, successful. You know, if a mom had 5 minutes while she was dropping her kid off at soccer to swing by and introduce herself and say hi, that might have been what happened. And it was super great. I mean, quite frankly, I thought it was awesome that we had those opportunities. But yeah, it does take time. I think we'd have to be a little bit choosier probably if we're gonna do something, but you are meeting them where they're at on their time frame.
I think the bigger thing, just from my perspective, goes back to the decision-making process where again, a lot of what I hear sometimes is, well, I'm not going to show up because the decision's already been made and nothing I'm going to bring or say is going to change the minds of what's happened. And so I think it's important that we, again, find that right time to say, hey, we're not in the decision-making mode. We're just in information collecting so that we can then make decisions down the road. And hey, you can come to the meeting on December 25th, not December 25th. I'm ready for Christmas.
I wouldn't be surprised at this point, John.
You know, we do the fireplace.
Just send me a calendar invite.
I won't.
We're all going
So, yeah. I'll get everybody a gift. Yeah, we can do a gift exchange. Well,
Shannon, in your process, you probably did this, but did you employ other community leaders like the Elvis and the Kiwanis and those folks, people, you know, business leaders who have credibility external to these groups, who can take the time to dig in and understand the issue and gain access to whatever constituencies they have. And I don't know if you did that. But
Yeah.
it seems to me that one of the ways that trust can be built is to find people who are trusted and see if they will extend some of that credibility outward to get a forum for a dialogue. And those audiences already exist. You know, the Rotary people, I guess, get thrown out if they're not there every week. So, you know,
I was just gonna say, I think that's a longer game, because I think if we, you know, we did engage quite a few people, and I think that maybe that's something that we have to think about, like engaging them even when we're not trying to do something, because that relationship has to be built. I mean, they may be kind of there, but I think that's something that we could look forward to as two bodies. Because I think engaging them when we need them is not necessarily maybe the right feeling.
Right, it's creating the relationship all along.
Right, yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, Jillian, more specifically, I think if we do a better job reading the community before we launch into solution mode, then a lot of these problems go away. I mean, to be honest, like this whole feeling of not being listened to, this, how do we get people to come to our meetings? How do we get people to engage and do this and do that? They don't feel compelled to do those things because we can't underestimate, we had some significant forces actively working against the project. And so if we can be better at gauging where the community support is, then that kind of eliminates some of this friction. And it won't be as big of a deal to reach every single person in Scarborough to try and get a packet in their hand, because there will be a better general sense of support behind the project. And I think part of our struggle was we were trying to meet every single person where they were, because we felt a tremendous amount of pressure for everybody.
Yeah, versus building the relationship, which if that was there, might we not have heard that you're not listening to me because I built this relationship along the way, right?
I think that's a huge undertaking, but it's worth getting the process started.
I think we also though have to be honest and real that we'll never have 100% consensus.
Of course.
And so, and then to me, the question is like how, when we don't, again, how can we still have a civil, respectful engagement and agree to disagree? And it's also okay if you disagree and vote no. Like when I talked to a few vote no's, I wasn't there to persuade or convince them. I was there to listen and say, you know what, that's important to you. That's valid for you. I'm not like, it's okay if that's what you want to do. And for some decisions, it's okay for people to not support it. But if you don't, let's figure out how we can still be constructive, civil, and respectful as a community and set that standard that we can agree to disagree and still go hang out and be friends and not take it personally and just say that's, you know, that's who we want to be as a community. We want to be the community where we listen, where we support each other, we embrace diversity, but we also understand with that comes disagreement, and we're going to have to learn how to live together in that disagreement and do it as respectfully and you know, hopefully a little bit more kinder as we can.
That's what I appreciate that you say that, because when we talk about the kinder part of it, and I just, you know, you guys, I always tell my kids, right, you need to think about when you're wrong, right? And so Don, I appreciate your feedback before, because I do think calling some of these groups hate groups might have been too strong. And I do think there is some benefit to having people from a different perspective share their perspective. It's the kindness piece that gets to me in terms of my frustration. And that's where I was speaking from, because when people aren't kind, it's like, that is the foundation for society, right? It's like, that's how nobody's raised to be like a terrible person. Everybody, you always teach your kids to be kind, say thank you, say please, right? So where does that get lost along the way as we grow up and become adults and then become neighbors? And I'm not expecting everybody to become our best friend, but I think the respect factor is what's most important. Being kind, agreeing to disagree is fine. It was more where my statement, it was out of frustration and calling, saying a hate group, which I feel is probably too strong to say that, but it's out of that frustration that we sit up here. And part of it, to be quite honest, is that it is frustrating to finally see everybody show up. And it's like, oh, we've been asking for this for a while. So I love it. And I'm frustrated with it at the same time, because we have invested a lot of time and we do have real lives out of this. And I do, every time I leave here, my kids are like, oh, Daddy, you're not going to put me to bed tonight, when it's every other Thursday. They know that. But I'm kind of bummed about that, right? So I made this commitment to do this because I want to better our community and create something better. And so I'm glad that you said that, because I think, your couple different comments allow me to reflect as well. And I think that that's what we need as a community. I think we need to be more reflective, figure out how we can be better and work better together to come up with a solution that, speaks to the masses of people. Because like Shannon said, I think it wasn't that it got voted down. It was more the level of how it got voted down that was most surprising to us.
And while I agree the trust is something we need to work on, and I'm 100% supportive of it, I also don't want to take away from the fact that with this particular project, there were so many reasons that were created headwinds for it to fail. And so, even if we had more trust, I still feel like it would have been moving a boulder up a mountain still, because of the complexity. And so that's not an excuse to say we don't work on it, but it's also, I think we also just all need to acknowledge that it failed on its own merits, and the lack of trust certainly didn't help it.
No.
But I can't say conclusively, I think that even if we all were like grabbing hands and singing Kumbaya, that it would have passed in the end. So,
Well, who's singing?
well, I know, I have a particular friend in the audience that I've. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like how this has become a bit, like.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're gonna,
Shannon,
yeah.
I know you guys are moving on to your meeting here shortly, but I just think for the importance of people here in this room and the community as a whole,
Mhm.
I think as you develop your next steps, which is this workshop is what are our next steps,
Yeah.
right? What are our next steps? Like, we can wring hands over this all day long, but we need to know what next
Yep.
steps are. You need to develop them and you need to get them out to the community so
Yeah.
they know what next steps are, and we
Yeah.
can be better at communicating out ahead of
Time.
right?
Yeah.
And I, don't want to lob criticism, but it just as an observation, I would say a lot of the outreach had happened post decision making time.
Yes.
A lot of the interaction with the community that you put so much time and effort was marketing, was, looking for votes. It was post decision making from either before, it happened after a council vote or it happened after a school board vote.
Yeah.
They weren't involved, I say they, the community wasn't as active or involved because the outreach wasn't as strong before we actually took the votes. It was much stronger at the
Yeah.
end. And there's also that old adage too, we can't take all the blame. You can lead a horse to water. There's a number of opportunities, there's a number of meetings, but let's be real. Most people aren't going to invest their time and their efforts until it hits them right in the face.
Yeah.
And that happens to be about a week before election day.
Yeah.
And that's just an honest truth from anyone that's been involved in community
Yeah.
politics for any amount of time.
Yeah.
So don't beat ourselves up too bad. There's always
No,
something
yeah.
we can do a lot better.
Yeah.
I think there's some lessons learned here. Best thing we can do is move forward and let's communicate it out how we're gonna move forward.
Yeah, so I think to that point, I think what I'm hearing from here, next steps is we can check with Kate if there's dollars
Figure
available.
out the survey thing.
Yeah, because it sounds like the survey is pretty well supported by everyone here. So I think that would be our immediate next step, and I would like that done sooner than later, especially if it's taking 7 to 8 weeks. So if we can,
Just so you know, about 5 weeks of it, I think, is them developing your questions and the background on the printing. So that can be going on over a holiday period.
yeah, we just have to get the ball rolling. So you'd be willing to help us with that, Tom?
Sure.
Okay, and then Jeff will ask Kate, so those will be our immediate steps. And then as we continue to look forward, thinking about, and I can work with you on this going forward, but thinking about joint opportunities to really engage the community and dialogue with the community. And what that looks like, we can flesh out a little bit more as we go forward. Hold on one second. I do have one more question as we look forward. I don't believe in the short term that we have a need for the architect back at the table. But I do want to just say that our contract with the architect is done now. And so we are operating from this point forward without an architect. So my question, Tom, for you, and this might need some work, but when we get to a point where we would potentially need someone, because I'm in agreement, we shouldn't be solution focused until we have a survey and until we've engaged the community a little bit more. Is our impact fees an acceptable use of that money? Is an architect an acceptable use of the impact fee money?
Really not my decision to make, but I would say that's a stretch.
That's,
It's really intended to be used for capital purposes,
Yeah.
not operational.
okay.
I will say, I was going back to documents from 2017, 2016, facilities master plans that were looking at scenario A, scenario B, scenario C, scenario D, up to 6 or 7 different scenarios. I know you were talking about this, feeling like the decision had always been made, and that's when people were engaged was after the fact. So the good news, as I see it, is that there's been so much work that dates back a decade,
Mhm.
even longer,
Mhm.
about how to address, our facilities capacity and issues and have all of our students actually attending school in schools, right?
Mm.
Permanent structures that are school buildings. When I say that, and so that being said, going back, depending on, I think what we get from the survey, going back and educating the public about the multiple different scenarios that were vetted, and then the impact each of those scenarios would have, both, from a financial impact, educational impact, all of those things. And then again, I think, John, you mentioned this, like, you're not going to get consensus, and anytime you're trying to redistrict, or you're closing a school, just one school, I mean, it's hard. And I think in particular with the K-2 schools and the attachment that generations of kids and families have to those schools is impactful. So, all of that said, educating and involving the public on the multiple possible solutions, even if, the solution that was proposed, and I certainly think it is, was the right one and the best one, long-term for students in our town. Got to go through that process, I think.
So.
Yeah.
Again, you mentioned the action on trust. I would propose, and we don't have committees yet, but why couldn't we have a Counselor Corner Live in December after Thanksgiving? That's joint with the board on just the conversation of trust, and how do we build back trust? Because we can sit here and hypothesize why, but we should ask the people why and see what we can do. When it comes to the architect, I guess kind of what I'm thinking at this point is, I feel like we have so much work to do in terms of getting feedback, understanding, thinking of the new committee. Do we need the architect right now, or can we just through the budget process find what may be needed based on the feedback we collect? And we have so many smart, great people in this community. I could see us making enough progress until the budget, which is going to be here before we know it, and see if that becomes the better mechanism for you guys to request additional funds for whatever is needed at that point.
Yeah, that could be, because to Jeff's point, we do have the 6 options here, right, that we have data on. So we could, I mean, I don't think there's a need for an architect right now.
Okay.
I don't. I think we could get started on our own, but there is going to come a point where we need them. Especially when we hear what the community wants and we start looking at what this looks like. We are going to need professional help.
Yeah, I agree.
Shannon, what do you think the big questions that need to be answered quickly with community input are? I mean, I can think of some, but I'm interested in what you think.
On the survey or just in general?
I'm just saying broadly, we need, in order to move deliberately, we need to move towards something. And what big questions do you think we need to answer to give some direction that comes from the community? Here, I'll just give you an answer. Little schools, neighborhood schools, or large unified school which replicates the feel of neighborhood schools. Just trying hard not to use the 3-letter word, 4-letter word. I mean, to my mind, that would be an example of a big question. Another example would be, what can we agree on today? For example, I saw stuff out there where people were challenging the enrollment data. Okay, so if you don't think that this COVID bubble or whatever we call it is moving through the system, then, and I don't know how widespread that is, but one of my questions is there a common understanding of the need and the data set? If there is, then the question is, well, how do we solve that problem? But if there's not a common understanding of what the problem is,
Yeah.
And there is some evidence that there is not, then how do you move forward? And then in that engagement, I would argue that you would build trust by engaging the community around community schools and leaning into and saying, as I heard from you with almost the first day we met, yes, we really wanted to keep these community schools. We tried, but we didn't see it as being feasible. Now, maybe the people in the community schools will think of things that you haven't, or they will reach the same conclusion that the school committee had seemed to come to, which in my recollection said, yeah, we can do it, but it will cost 260 million. I don't know what's true. I mean, I'm not challenging you data, but what I'm saying is that to Nick's point, there is a real opportunity to go all the way back to those fundamental questions and engage people and say, okay. So if his argument is correct that you were, you conveyed the notion that you were already at solution and you were into selling, well, there's no question right now that nobody's at the solution. Everybody's looking for a new path. So I don't know if those are the big questions, but I think that those big directional questions need to get addressed right at the top of the line. And those are the ones to engage the community on. And I'll add one more, affordability. So we heard, and I'm not talking about a big number, I'm talking about your pocketbook and to gain some real understanding of what does the tax impact mean. For me, it may have been a vacation when I'm 80, okay? But for other people, it may have made the difference between whether they can live there or not live there. And so that's another area that I think needs to get a real second look. I mean, I was very impressed with the data gizmo. That was really cool and very effective. But one of the things it did was cause this people to actually look at it and go, oh my God, I can't afford this. Right? I mean, it might be the best idea in the world, but you're going to push me into some hard choices if this goes through. So
I think both of those, I think the small school and the unified school, what is the feeling there is a big one. I think affordability is a big one. The affordability, for me also, I think I am interested in knowing, is breaking I'm very nervous to say this, but is breaking up a big project into smaller projects, does that make it, is the impact, the day-to-day impact less impactful? So in other words, is somebody who is deciding, does this project mean I cannot afford to live here anymore? If we break it up into smaller projects, does that take that burden away? I don't know. That's a question I would like to understand. And then I think when you talk about the unified versus the smaller schools, I think you by nature get into the location. Well, we haven't talked about it. We're out of time and we have to go, but the location is seemingly no longer an issue. So I think we probably would have heard a lot about that as well. I think that would have been my third. So those would have been my top three.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, any other thoughts before we wrap up?
Thank you for having all of us here.
Of course, thank you for coming, and thank you for coming short notice.
And it's not that you have a lot of work, we have a lot of work, so.
And thank you for recognizing that.
We look forward to it.
We look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Do you have a date for the December meeting, Counselor Corner, or not yet?
No, that's new to me information. Wait.
December 25th.
I will follow up with you.
Bring your presents.
Speaking of new to me, I was sleeping at the last part of the meeting
I'll
when
get
somebody
in
said
touch
I had
with
an
you,
assignment. So
We are gonna break down really quick to get ready for the next meeting. And again, if you want to make public comment, just hang out for the meeting, but also I'd invite you to hang out to see the kids because they're probably lined up in the hallway. Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
I love that. I should put your committee.